I have spent 12 years in courtrooms reading rooms and boardrooms, and I have never once let anyone see me flinch. That Friday night in late October inside the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Biltmore Hotel, I held that record. 200 people in the room. Crystal chandeliers throwing gold light across every table. The smell of gardenias and expensive cologne hanging in the air like a promise. And somewhere behind me, a jazz quartet playing something soft and unhurried, the kind of music that makes people feel like the world is exactly as it should be. Then my husband of 12 years stepped up to the podium, raised his glass, and introduced his mistress as his partner. In every sense of the word. He didn't look at me when he said it. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I picked up the champagne glass I had been holding for 40 minutes without drinking, and I set it down very slowly, very carefully, and I stood up. What Damon never knew was that page 47 of a document he signed 12 years ago had been waiting for exactly this moment. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe if you haven't, because you will not want to miss a single second of what comes next. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you about the woman I was before that night. Because you need to understand her, really. Understand her to understand why what happened next meant everything it did. My name is Celeste Monique Hargrove, born and raised in Southwest Atlanta, the only daughter of a high school principal and a registered nurse. I grew up in a house where education was not a suggestion, it was oxygen. My mother used to say, "Celeste, your mind is the one thing nobody can take from you." I held on to that my entire life. I just never imagined the day would come when someone would try. I graduated top of my class from Emory University School of Law at 25. By 32, I had made partner at Whitfield and Associates, one of the most respected corporate law firms in Atlanta. My specialty was business formation and contract law. Meaning, I spent my days building the legal architecture that held companies together, the frameworks, the protections, the fine print that most people signed without reading. I understood better than almost anyone how much power lived in a well-written clause. My office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city I loved. I had a caseload that would have broken most people, and a reputation that had taken 15 years to build one careful decision at a time. I worked hard. I worked constantly. And I was good at what I did. That was the professional version of me. The personal version, she was something else entirely. I met Damon Elijah Hargrove at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Midtown the summer I turned 28. He was 31 tall with a laugh that filled whatever room he was in and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person on earth. He had ideas, big ones. He wanted to build an investment firm from the ground up. He had the vision and the drive and the personality to walk into any room and make people believe in him. What he didn't have yet was the infrastructure, the legal foundation, the connections to the kind of money that could make a vision real. I had all of those things. I told myself that what we built together was a partnership, equal, mutual. I believed that for a very long time. In those early years, it felt true. I spent 3 years providing legal counsel to Hargrove Capital Group, at no charge structuring the company, drafting the operating agreements, building the protections that would hold the whole thing together if anything ever went sideways. I made calls. I introduced Damon to Gerald Ashford, a private equity investor I had worked with on a previous deal, a man whose endorsement in Atlanta's investment community was worth more than most people's entire portfolios. I introduced him to 2 other major investors through my own professional network, people who trusted me before they ever trusted Damon. I wrote every foundational document this company rested on, every clause, every protection. Damon signed them. And in those days, he was grateful. Genuinely, visibly grateful. He used to come up behind me when I was working late at the kitchen table, wrap his arms around me and say, "We're going to build something incredible, Celeste. You and me." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Maybe that was always my weakness. I gave my loyalty completely. and I held on long past the point I should have let go. We got married in the spring in a ceremony at the Botanical Garden. 220 guests. My mother cried through the entire reception. Damon danced with her twice. I thought standing there in that garden with Atlanta blooming all around me, I thought I had everything. We bought a house in Buckhead, 5,000 square feet on a quiet street, lined with oak trees, with a kitchen big enough to cook for a crowd and a back porch where we drank coffee every Sunday morning and talked about nothing and everything at the same time. Those Sunday mornings were my favorite hours of the week, just the two of us before the phone started ringing, before the city woke up and started demanding things. Hargrove Capital grew, slowly at first, then faster than either of us had projected. By our 8th year of marriage, Damon was being profiled in Atlanta Business Chronicle. He spoke at conferences. He got invited onto boards. The firm that had started as an idea at a dinner table was now managing over $80 million in assets. Atlanta knew his name. And through all of it, I was at Whitfield and Associates making partner-winning cases, building my own career alongside the one I had helped him build. We were by every visible measure one of Atlanta's power couples. I want you to sit with that image for a moment, because what comes next is going to hurt, and I need you to understand what was real, or what I believed was real, before it all came apart. Now, around the time Damon began talking about expanding Hargrove Capital into a new division, a venture capital arm targeting early-stage tech companies, he started holding meetings I wasn't included in. That was new. For 12 years, even when the meetings had nothing to do with my legal work, Damon had always kept me informed. We talked about strategy over dinner, over coffee, on the drive to events. It was how we operated. Then one evening in early spring, I asked him about a meeting he'd had that afternoon with what he called his new strategic advisory team. He waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. "It's just early stage stuff, baby. You'd be bored." You'd be bored. I had structured the legal foundation of his entire company, and he told me I'd be bored. I let it go. I was in the middle of a major commercial litigation case that was consuming 60 hours of my week. I told myself Damon was just excited about a new direction and moving fast. That was how he operated, fast and forward always. I told myself that for about 3 weeks. Then I met Tiffany. Tiffany Grace Ashford was 27 years old, sharp-eyed with a smile that arrived slightly before it needed to, and stayed slightly longer than felt natural. She had come to me 18 months earlier through a mentorship program I volunteered with young professionals in finance and law. She was bright, ambitious, and hungry in the way that reminded me of myself at that age. I had recommended her personally to Damon for a strategic advisor role. I had made the introduction. I had vouched for her. She shook my hand at the Hargrove Capital holiday party that December and said, "Celeste, I want you to know I wouldn't be in this room without you. You opened every door for me. I mean that." I had squeezed her hand and told her she'd earned it herself. I meant that too. Then 3 days later, I found a silk handkerchief in the inside pocket of Damon's charcoal wool vest, the one he'd worn to a client dinner the week before. Ivory. Monogrammed with the initials TGA, a fragrance that was not mine, something light and floral, young. I stood in our walk-in closet for a long moment, that handkerchief in my hand. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my nightstand drawer. I told myself it was nothing. A colleague, a greeting, an accident of proximity. But that scent stayed with me. Long after I closed the drawer, long after I turned off the light, long after Damon came home that night and kissed me on the cheek like everything was exactly as it should be, something in my gut said otherwise. I just wasn't ready to listen yet. I want to tell you about the good years first, because they were real, and because you cannot fully understand the weight of what was taken from me unless you understand what I actually had. In the early days of Hargrove Capital, Damon and I used to work side by side at the dining room table until 2 and 3 in the morning. He would sketch out investment strategies on legal pads while I drafted the operating agreements that would make those strategies legally sound. We'd order takeout from this little Jamaican place on Cascade Road that stayed open late, and we'd eat out of the containers without bothering to get plates, laughing about something or nothing, the whole city quiet outside our windows. Those were some of the best hours of my life, not because anything dramatic was happening, but because we were building something together and we both knew it, and there was a kind of joy in that kind of shared purpose that I have not found words for even now. I love Damon. I want to be clear about that. Whatever he became, whatever he always was, underneath the version I chose to see, I loved the man I believed he was. I loved the way he called my mother every Sunday without being asked. I loved the way he remembered every detail of every story I ever told him could bring up something I'd mentioned once in passing 3 years later, like it had been said that morning. I loved the way he looked at me at events across crowded rooms, like I was the most interesting person in any space we entered together. I loved him. And loving him made me slow to see things I should have seen years earlier, because the signs were there. Looking back now, they were everywhere. I just kept finding reasons to look away. The first real crack came the night of the Georgia Bar Association Awards ceremony in October. I had been nominated for Attorney of the Year, the result of a landmark commercial litigation case. I'd spent 18 months building a case that had set a precedent in Georgia contract law that my colleagues said would be cited for the next 2 decades. It was the proudest professional moment of my life. My mother flew in from Florida. Renee Washington, my closest friend since our undergraduate days at Spelman, sat in the front row in a gold dress and cried before they even announced my name. Damon was not there. He called at 6:15 in the evening, 45 minutes before the ceremony, to tell me there was an emergency board situation that could not wait. His voice was even, apologetic in the way that had become practice smooth and pre-packaged like an email template. "Baby, I am so sorry. You know I would be there if I could. You're going to win, and you're going to be incredible, and I will take you to Bones for dinner this weekend to celebrate. I promise." I stood in the bathroom of the venue in my green gown phone pressed to my ear, and I said, "It's okay, Damon. I understand." And I meant it. That was the thing. I actually meant it. 2 days later, Renee called me. She'd seen an Instagram story posted by someone we both knew socially, a woman who documented every upscale restaurant meal she ever ate, and in the background of a candlelit dinner at Canoe Restaurant on the Chattahoochee at a corner table, partially obscured by a flower arrangement, was Damon. And across from him, leaning forward wine glass in hand, was Tiffany Ashford. The timestamp on the story was 7:43 in the evening, the night of my awards ceremony. I confronted him that Sunday morning. Not with anger. I was not angry yet, which I think now was part of the problem. I was confused. I was asking, genuinely asking, because I still believed there was an explanation that would make sense of it. I said, "Damon Renee saw you at Canoe on Friday night, with Tiffany." He didn't miss a beat. He turned from the coffee maker, cup in hand, expression perfectly calibrated to mild exasperation. "It was a working dinner, Celeste. She had a proposal she needed to walk me through before the Monday meeting. I should have mentioned it, I know, but it wasn't anything worth interrupting your evening over." "You told me you had an emergency board situation. It was work-related. Same difference." I looked at him for a long moment. He held my gaze without blinking, and I actually thought, maybe I was making something out of nothing. Maybe I was tired and stressed, and letting the pressure of my caseload turn me into someone suspicious and small. "You should have just told me," I said finally. "You're right. I'm sorry." He kissed my forehead. "Now can we please enjoy our Sunday?" I let it go, but I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. And what I noticed over the following weeks was a shift so gradual I might have missed it entirely if I hadn't been looking. Damon started mentioning Tiffany in conversation with a casualness that felt rehearsed. Tiffany suggested this new allocation strategy. She's got great instincts. Young blood, over dinner, in the car. Once at a Sunday brunch with his family in front of his mother Miriam and two of his cousins, he said it without seeming to realize how it landed. Half our growth projections this quarter came from Tiffany's recommendations. She thinks differently than anyone we've had on the team. Nobody at that table reacted. I picked up my orange juice and said nothing. Then came the evening that I cannot unknow. I was working late, close to midnight, hunched over a contract review at the kitchen table because I preferred the kitchen light to my home office when I was tired. Damon's laptop was open beside mine the way it sometimes was when we worked side by side out of habit. He had gone upstairs an hour earlier. The screen had dimmed but not locked. I reached across to move it out of my way, and the screen brightened. There was an email draft, unsent. The recipient field Tiffany Ashford. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained 2 words, Miss You. I sat very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street. I read those 2 words 4 times. Then I moved the laptop back to where it had been closed, my contract documents turned off the kitchen light, and walked upstairs. Damon was asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, looking at him in the dark. Then I went to the guest bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and I pressed my hands flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. I did not sleep that night. And the next morning, before Damon came downstairs, my phone rang. It was Renee. Her voice was careful in the way it got when she was about to say something she knew would land hard. "Celeste," she said, "I need you to come to my office. Don't tell Damon. There's something you need to see about the company accounts." Renee Washington has been my best friend for 19 years. We met freshman year at Spelman, 2 girls from Atlanta who had both grown up believing that working twice as hard was just the price of admission. She became a CPA, built her own accounting firm on Auburn Avenue, and developed a mind for numbers that I have always described as almost frightening in its precision. Renee does not miss things. She does not raise alarms without cause. So when she called me that morning with that careful voice, I knew before I walked through her office door that what she had found was real. Her office smelled like coffee and paperwork. She had a spreadsheet pulled up on her monitor and a printed set of bank statements spread across her desk in a way that told me she had been there since early morning arranging them. She didn't hug me when I came in. She just pointed to the chair across from her and said, "Sit down." I sat. She walked me through it methodically the way she did everything, no dramatics, just facts laid out in sequence. Over the previous 6 months, Damon had opened 3 subsidiary accounts under the Hargrove Capital umbrella. Not unusual on its own for a growing firm. What was unusual was that none of them appeared in the company's standard financial reporting. And what was deeply unmistakably wrong was that funds had been moving steadily in amounts carefully calibrated to avoid automatic reporting thresholds from our joint personal accounts into those subsidiaries. $220,000 over 6 months. Gone in increments small enough to look like routine business expenses to anyone not paying close attention. Renee had been paying close attention. "How long have you known?" I asked. "I found the first transfer 3 weeks ago when I was reconciling your quarterly personal statements. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." She paused. Celeste, whoever set this up, knew what they were doing. The amounts, the timing, the account structure, this was not careless. I drove home in silence, parked in the driveway, sat in the car for 11 minutes I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to. Then I went inside. Damon was in his home office jacket off on the phone. He held up one finger when I appeared in the doorway, the universal signal for "give me a minute," and finished his call with the easy confidence of a man who had no idea what was coming. He hung up, leaned back in his chair, and smiled at me. "Hey, baby, you eat lunch." "I went to see Renee," I said. Something moved across his face, fast, gone before I could name it. "Oh yeah, how's she doing?" She showed me the subsidiary accounts, Damon, the transfers from our joint account. The smile didn't disappear, it just changed. Became something harder underneath like a mask that had shifted slightly off-center. He leaned forward and set his elbows on the desk. "Those are internal restructuring accounts. Standard procedure for the new division. They're not in any of the financial reports because they're pre-reporting stage. Celeste. His voice carried a note I hadn't heard before, not anger, something more deliberate than anger. You're a lawyer, not a businesswoman. You keep forgetting your lane. I felt those words land in my chest like something physical. That money came from our joint account, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of how steady it was. I have every right to ask, and I'm telling you it's handled. He stood up. I don't ask you to explain every billing decision you make at Whitfield, do I? This is my company. I need you to trust me. I do trust you. I'm asking you a question. You're interrogating me. His jaw tightened. Is this about Tiffany again? Because if you're going to turn every business conversation into an accusation, I didn't mention Tiffany. You didn't have to. He walked past me out of the room. The conversation was over. That was how it worked. Damon ended things when they became inconvenient. He'd always done it, and I had always let him, telling myself it was just how he processed conflict, that he needed space, that pushing would only make things worse. That evening, his mother Miriam came for dinner, an unscheduled visit, that in retrospect I understand was not unscheduled at all. She brought a sweet potato pie and filled the kitchen with cheerful noise, while Damon relaxed visibly in her presence, in the way men do when their mothers arrive to buffer the atmosphere. We ate. We talked about his cousin's new baby. We talked about the gala coming up in October. Then Damon, seemingly out of nowhere, looked at me across the table and said in front of his mother, in front of the sweet potato pie and the good china, "Half this room wouldn't even know your name if it wasn't attached to mine, Celeste. I just think sometimes you forget that." Miriam said nothing. She cut herself another slice of pie. I set my fork down. I looked at my husband. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was focused very deliberately on her plate. And I understood in that moment that they had talked before she came over. After dinner, while Damon took a call in his office, Miriam found me in the kitchen. She touched my arm with the gentle authority she had always used when she wanted to reframe something as wisdom. "Baby," she said quietly, "men like Damon, they have pressures we don't always see. You know how much he loves you. Don't go looking for problems that aren't there." I looked at her, this woman who had hugged me at my wedding, who had called me daughter for 12 years. "Did he tell you about the accounts, Miriam?" Her hand dropped from my arm. Her expression didn't change exactly, but it closed, like a door being gently, firmly shut. "I think you need to focus on your marriage," she said. "That's all I'm saying." She left at 9. I washed the dishes alone. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting at my desk in the home office, not working, just sitting, turning over everything I knew, and everything I suspected, and everything I was afraid to name out loud. And I thought about 12 years. About Sunday mornings and late nights and a company I had helped build from a conversation over takeout into something worth $80 million. And I thought about 2 words in an unsent email and a silk handkerchief with someone else's initials. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 2 years, Marcus Webb, the best divorce and asset protection attorney in Atlanta. A man I had referred clients to more times than I could count, whose work I respected completely, and whose number I had told myself I would never need for myself. I stared at his name for a long time, then I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Marcus, it's Celeste Hargrove. I need to meet with you. Soon." A pause. Then carefully, "I can do tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I'll be there." I hung up. And before I could talk myself out of it, before the part of me that always found reasons to hold on could construct another excuse, I opened my laptop and pulled up the original incorporation documents for Hargrove Capital Group. The ones I had drafted myself 12 years ago, sitting at this same desk in a different house with a different version of my life, spread out in front of me. I started reading from the beginning. By the time I reached page 47, it was past midnight. I sat back in my chair, read the clause again, and for the first time in weeks, something in my chest went very, very still. Marcus was going to want to hear about this. Marcus Webb's office was on the 17th floor of a building on West Peachtree with a view of Midtown that, on any other morning, I might have stopped to appreciate. That Tuesday, I didn't look at the view. I sat across from him at his conference table with the Hargrove Capital Incorporation documents in a folder on my lap, and I told him everything. The accounts, the transfers, the email draft, the handkerchief, Miriam's visit, Damon's words at the dinner table. All of it in the precise sequential way I had been trained to present facts, because if I let myself feel it while I was telling it, I wasn't sure I would get through it cleanly. Marcus listened without interrupting. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him, and he wrote things down as I talked, but his eyes stayed on me the whole time, which is the mark of someone who understands that the facts and the person telling them are equally important. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Show me the incorporation documents." I slid the folder across the table. He read carefully, turned pages, slowed down when he reached the financial structure section, and then he reached page 47 and he stopped completely. Read it once, read it again, set the page down and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Celeste," he said. "Did you know this clause was still in here?" "I wrote it," I said. 12 years ago, I put it in as a standard protection measure during the formation stage, and then we never revisited the documents. He never asked to revise them." "He never read them," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. Damon signs what I put in front of him. He always has. He trusts his vision and he trusts other people to handle the details." I paused. He trusted me to handle the details. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Then he has no idea what he signed." "No," I said. "He doesn't." We sat with that for a moment. Outside, Atlanta hummed 22 floors below us, indifferent and continuous. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "Here's what I need you to do. Nothing. You do nothing, you say nothing, you change nothing about your behavior at home. You go to work, you come home, you attend whatever events are on the calendar. You give him no reason to accelerate whatever timeline he's operating on." He tapped the legal pad. "And you give me time to build the full picture." I nodded. I could do that. Stillness under pressure was something I had spent my entire career practicing. What I did not anticipate was how much the picture would cost me to watch being built. Over the following 3 weeks, Marcus retained a licensed private investigator, a woman named Sandra Cole, who specialized in financial fraud and domestic cases, and who delivered her findings with the same flat affect as a weather report. Sandra documented 4 separate occasions on which Damon and Tiffany met outside of any plausible business context. A Saturday afternoon at a private residence in Decatur that was registered to a Shell LLC, 2 evenings at the Lowe's Atlanta Hotel, and 1 weekend in Savannah. The same weekend, Damon had told me he was attending an investor summit at the Westin. Sandra had photographs, timestamps, credit card records obtained through proper legal channels. I looked at those photographs once. Then I put them face down on Marcus's conference table, and I did not look at them again. But it was what Marcus found in the corporate restructuring documents that truly took the floor out from under me. The law firm Damon had hired quietly without telling me 6 months earlier had been systematically attempting to neutralize the spousal equity protection clause on page 47. They had drafted 3 versions of an amendment that would have effectively dissolved my equity interest in Hargrove Capital. 3 versions, each one slightly different in approach, each one failing to account for the notarization requirements that made the original clause ironclad under Georgia law. They hadn't succeeded, but they had tried, methodically, repeatedly. And while they were trying, Damon had been preparing a parallel document, a transfer of equity interest from the marital estate to Tiffany Grace Ashford, structured through 2 shell companies incorporated in Delaware. If it had gone through by the time Damon filed for divorce, there would have been nothing left for me to claim. This was not a man who had fallen for someone else and lost his way. This was a plan. Marcus said it out loud so I wouldn't have to. He's been building an exit strategy for at least 9 months, Celeste. This was coordinated. The accounts, the restructuring, the transfer documents, this didn't happen by accident. I heard him. I processed every word. And then I went home and I made dinner, and I sat across from Damon at our kitchen table, and I asked him how his day was. He told me about a meeting, something about a new portfolio company in Charlotte. He was animated, enthusiastic, the version of himself that had made people believe in him for 20 years. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said, "I'm glad we're okay, baby." I squeezed back. "Me too," I said. I'm not proud of that moment, but I'm not ashamed of it either. Sometimes survival looks like a smile across a dinner table. The following week was when Damon's behavior shifted in a way I had not prepared myself for. I was in the middle of a major contract dispute, a case involving a commercial real estate developer and 3 subcontractors that had been consuming my mornings and most of my evenings. Damon knew this. He had watched me lose sleep over it for 6 weeks. On a Wednesday evening, he came into the home office where I was working and set a document on the desk beside my laptop. "Need your signature on this before the end of the week," he said. "Routine restructuring paperwork for the new division, just the spousal acknowledgement section." I looked at the document. It was 43 pages. The cover sheet described it as an amendment to the subsidiary account authorization structure. "I'll need to read it first," I said. "It's routine, Celeste. Marcus Chen at the restructuring firm already reviewed it." He used a name I didn't recognize. Not the firm. I knew not anyone in our usual network. "It's just an acknowledgement that you're aware of the restructuring. Standard stuff." I looked up at him. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed the picture of casual patience, but his eyes were doing the thing they did when he was waiting for a specific outcome. "I'll read it this weekend," I said. Something flickered in his expression. "The deadline is Friday. Then I'll read it tomorrow." He pushed off the doorframe. "You know what your problem is. You treat everything like a deposition. I'm your husband, not opposing counsel." He left. I picked up the document and read every single page that night. Buried in section 31 in language deliberately constructed to blend into the surrounding text was a clause that would have voided the spousal equity protection clause, entirely framed as a routine modernization of outdated contractual language. He had tried to get me to sign away my own protection without reading what I was signing. I set the document down, picked up my phone, texted Marcus 4 words. He just escalated. "Call me." Then I looked up at the ceiling of the room where I had built half my career and all of my marriage, and I felt something happen inside me that I do not have a precise word for. It was not anger exactly. It was quieter than anger, more certain. Like a door closing softly, but completely the latch catching with a sound you feel more than hear. I was done being the person this was happening to. It was time to become the person deciding what happened next. Marcus called me back within 10 minutes. I read him the clause over the phone section, 31 word for word, standing in my home office with the door locked and my voice at the level I used in depositions controlled precise, no room for anything personal to leak through the edges. When I finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he brought in outside counsel specifically to draft language that would neutralize your protection clause and then tried to get you to sign it yourself. Yes. While you were exhausted and distracted by a major case. Yes. Another pause. Celeste, this crossed a line. This is no longer just a divorce strategy. What he attempted tonight, getting you to unknowingly sign away a legally protected interest through deliberately obscured contractual language, that is fraud. That is a criminal matter. I already knew that. I had known it the moment I read Section 31. I had spent 15 years in contract law, and I recognized the architecture of deception when I saw it, even when it was aimed at me, especially when it was aimed at me. "I'm not going to sign it," I said. "Obviously not, but Celeste, we need to talk about timeline. Because if he's escalating to this level, he may be closer to filing than we thought. We need to move." "Not yet," I said. "Celeste. Marcus, not yet. I need you to trust me on this." He exhaled. "Okay, but I need you to tell me what you're thinking." What I was thinking was this Damon had spent 9 months building a trap for me. He had done it carefully, strategically, with legal counsel and shell companies and documents designed to look like routine paperwork. He had used my trust, my distraction, my fundamental belief in the marriage we had built together. He had looked me in the eye every single day while he did it. If I moved now quietly through lawyers and negotiations and private settlements, he would lose some things and gain others. His reputation would remain largely intact. Tiffany would remain largely intact. And the 200 people who attended the Atlanta Children's Hospital Charity Gala every October, the investors, the board members, the community leaders, the people Damon had built his public identity in front of, they would never know. That did not feel like justice to me. That felt like a transaction. I wanted him to lose everything in the same room where he had built everything, in front of the same people. But to do that, I needed more time. "There's a gala in October," I said. "The charity gala. I need you to have everything ready by then." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's 6 weeks." "I know. You're going to live in that house for 6 more weeks." "I've been living in that house for 12 years. 6 weeks is nothing." He agreed. We hung up, and I went to bed beside my husband, and I lay in the dark, and I breathed, and I did not feel anything at all. That was when I knew I had crossed into a different kind of territory. The grief had not gone away, but something stronger had moved in front of it. The following days were some of the most disorienting of my life, and I want to be honest about that because I think sometimes people tell these stories and make it sound clean, like once you decide to fight back the pain, just steps aside and lets the strategy through. It does not work that way. There were mornings I sat in my car in the parking garage at Whitfield and Associates for 10 or 15 minutes before I could make myself go inside. There was a Tuesday night when I stood in the kitchen looking at the coffee cups on the shelf, the matching ones we had bought at a market in Savannah 3 years earlier, the ones we used every Sunday morning, and I had to put my hand against the counter to stay standing. It hurt. Every single day it hurt. I just stopped letting the hurt make my decisions. And then came the evening that rearranged everything. It was a Thursday. Damon was at what he said was a late dinner with the board. I was at home ostensibly working, actually running through the incorporation documents for the 4th time, looking for anything Marcus and I might have missed. The house was quiet. The October air had turned cool enough to leave the back porch door open, and I could hear the neighborhood settling into itself, a dog somewhere, the distant sound of a neighbor's television, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. No name, no greeting, just a screenshot. I opened it. It was a text exchange between 2 numbers, one of which I recognized immediately as Damon's. The other I did not know at first, but I would. The exchange read, "Damon transfer timeline, still on track, unknown Delaware filings, clear end of month. Once that processes, you can file whenever. Damon." She still doesn't know unknown. She has no idea. Once the transfer clears, it doesn't matter what she knows. Damon good. Keep it that way. Then 3 messages down in a thread that appeared to be from a different day, unknown. "Should I come over tonight, Damon? She's home." Unknown. "Tomorrow then. I've been thinking about what you said, about after." Damon. "After is going to be everything I promised you. Just be patient. Unknown. I trust you." I sat on the back porch steps with my phone in both hands. The cool air moved through the yard. Somewhere a car alarm went off briefly and then stopped. The dog barked twice and went quiet. I did not cry. I want to tell you I didn't cry because it's true, but I also want to tell you that the absence of tears was not strength. It was a kind of shock that goes too deep for tears. The truth didn't just hurt. It hollowed me out, like someone had reached in and removed something essential. Something I had not known, I was still holding on to until it was gone. He had promised her everything. He had called it after. A whole future built on the wreckage of mine already named and planned and anticipated while I was sitting across from him at dinner asking about his day. I went inside. I locked the back door. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I forwarded the screenshot to Marcus with one line, "Find out who sent this to me, and whatever you need from me to move forward, I'm ready." Marcus called back within the hour. He had already had Sandra begin tracing the number, but that wasn't what he led with. What he led with was this. "Celeste, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. There's something I found in the shell company filings that you need to see. Something about the Ashford girl." "What about her?" A pause that lasted just long enough to tell me it was significant. "Her father," Marcus said. "Gerald Ashford. I think you need to know who she is before we go any further." I set the phone down on the table, stared at the wall. Outside, the October night had gone fully dark, and somewhere in that darkness, in a restaurant or a hotel room or a future he had already named and furnished and promised to someone else my husband was having dinner. I picked the phone back up. "I'll be there at 8. I looked around the kitchen I had cooked in for 12 years, at the coffee cups on the shelf, at the back porch door I had just locked. Then I said out loud to no one, "Gerald Ashford." And something clicked into place that I could not yet name, but could absolutely feel the specific sensation of a puzzle piece, finding its fit in the dark. Marcus's office at 8 in the morning had a different quality than it did at other hours. Quieter. More honest somehow. The city outside his windows was still finding its footing, the lights still gray and provisional, and there was no one in the waiting area, no phones ringing, just Marcus at his conference table, with 2 cups of coffee and a folder thick enough to tell me the night had been long for him, too. He slid one of the cups toward me. I sat down. He opened the folder. Gerald Ashford. He said, "Is Tiffany's father." I heard the words. I let them settle. I thought about Gerald, a man I had known professionally for 9 years, a man whose phone number I had given to Damon at the very beginning, whose endorsement had opened the first real doors for Hargrove Capital, a man who had shaken my hand at industry events for nearly a decade and asked after my career with what I had always taken for genuine warmth, a man who believed, as far as I could tell, that his daughter was Damon's strategic advisor. Nothing more. "Does he know?" I asked. "About Damon and Tiffany," number Sandra confirmed it. "Gerald thinks she's a business associate. He's told colleagues he's proud of her for landing such a senior role at her age." Marcus paused. "He doesn't know what kind of role it actually is." I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Outside, a siren passed on West Peachtree and faded into the distance. "He introduced me to Gerald," I said. Not to Marcus, really. More to the room. More to the version of myself that had made that introduction at a dinner party 9 years ago, proud and generous, believing she was helping build something that would outlast them both. Damon met Gerald because of me. Tiffany got that position because of me. I opened every door in that building. Every single one. Marcus let me sit with that for a moment. He was good at knowing when not to speak. Then I set the coffee cup down. "Tell me what we have," I said, and something happened to my voice when I said it. I heard it myself, the shift. It wasn't louder or harder. If anything, it was quieter, but it had a different texture than everything I had said in the previous weeks. The grief was still there. It would be there for a long time, but it had moved to one side, and what was standing in front of it now was something I recognized from my best days in a courtroom. Clarity. The particular stillness of a mind that has finished processing the emotional reality and started processing the tactical one. I was done mourning the marriage. It was time to work. Marcus walked me through everything. Sandra's documentation, the photographs, the timestamps, the hotel records, all of it legally obtained and admissible. The shell company filings in Delaware traceable through public records back to Damon's personal attorney. The attempted amendment to the incorporation documents, the one he had tried to get me to sign, in a moment of exhaustion, preserved in its original form, annotated by Marcus with the specific legal violations it represented. and at the center of it, all intact and unassailable, page 47. The spousal equity protection clause notarized and witnessed and bearing Damon's signature in the confident, forward-leaning script he used when he was signing things he hadn't read. It was as a body of evidence comprehensive. It was also, I realized, as Marcus laid it out piece by piece, a portrait, not just of what Damon had done, but of who he had always been. A man who signed things he hadn't read because he trusted other people to handle the details. A man who had built a career on vision and charisma and the labor of someone who loved him enough to do the foundational work without asking for credit. A man who, when he decided the foundation was no longer useful to him, attempted to dismantle it and didn't understand that the woman who built it had designed it to be stronger than he was. "Here is what I want to do," I said. I told Marcus about the gala. The Atlanta Children's Hospital Charity Gala held every October at the Atlanta Biltmore, an event I had founded 8 years earlier, an event that Damon had gradually absorbed into his public identity, listing it on his corporate biography, mentioning it in interviews, accepting the gratitude of donors who did not always know that the organizational architecture behind it had been built by his wife, an event where Gerald Ashford had a table every year, where Hargrove Capital's major investors gathered in one room, where the people whose money and trust and professional endorsement had built everything Damon had, they would all be present. "I want him to make his move there," I said. "I think he's planning to introduce Tiffany publicly, use the gala to begin repositioning his image, the dynamic new CEO, the exciting new partner, the suggestion of a new chapter. He'll want to control the narrative before he files." Marcus looked at me steadily. "And you want to be in the room when he does it?" "I want Gerald Ashford to be in the room when he does it," I said. "I want every investor at that table to be in the room. And I want a sealed copy of this evidence package delivered to Gerald Ashford the moment Damon makes his announcement." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said slowly, "That's not a divorce strategy, Celeste. That's a controlled detonation." "Yes," I said, "it is." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. "Okay, walk me through exactly what you want to happen." We spent 4 hours in that conference room. When I left, I had a plan so precise I could feel every piece of it sitting in its correct position. I drove back to Buckhead with the windows down and the October air coming through the car, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself. Not the version of myself that had been moving through her own life like a ghost performing normalcy for an audience of one. The real version. The one who had graduated top of her class and built a career on the belief that preparation was the only form of power that couldn't be taken from you. That evening, I called Renee, told her everything. She was silent for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "Tell me what you need from me." "I need you to be at that gala," I said, "and I need you to wear something that makes you feel invincible." She laughed a short, fierce sound. "Already done." Then I called Gerald Ashford. We spoke for 20 minutes about the gala, about Hargrove Capital's latest quarter, about his daughter's career trajectory. He was warm and proud and completely unsuspecting. When we hung up, I sat with the weight of what I knew about his family that he did not, and I felt the complexity of it, the sadness of it even. Gerald was not a villain in this story. He was a father who thought his daughter was thriving. He deserved to know the truth. And he would. Just not yet. In the weeks that followed, I was a woman in 2 registers simultaneously. At home, I was Celeste the wife present, pleasant giving Damon nothing to be suspicious of. I attended the events on our calendar. I answered his questions about my cases. When he told me I looked beautiful at a fundraiser dinner 2 weeks before the gala and reached for my hand in the car on the way home, I let him take it. I looked out the window at Atlanta moving past in the dark, and I thought about page 47. And then came the evening, 4 days before the gala, when Damon came home in an expansive mood, the mood he got when he felt the world arranging itself to his satisfaction, poured himself a drink, and said with the particular carelessness of a man who has stopped worrying about consequences, "You should be grateful, Celeste. Everything you have, this house, this life, this city, knowing your name, I gave you that. Not everybody gets what you got." I looked up from my book. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Standing there in our kitchen with his drink completely certain, completely unafraid. I smiled. "You're right," I said. "I have a lot to be grateful for." He nodded, satisfied, and went upstairs. I waited until I heard his footsteps cross the bedroom floor above me. Then I picked up my phone and texted Marcus 3 words: "We are ready." The Atlanta Biltmore Hotel sits on West Peachtree Street like it has always been there, and always will be a building that understands its own dignity, with high ceilings and marble floors, and the particular hush of a space that has hosted 100 years of occasions that mattered. I had chosen it for the gala 8 years earlier because it felt like a room that took things seriously. Standing in the lobby that Friday evening in late October, watching the staff move through their final preparations, the floral arrangements going up and the lighting settling into its warm register, I thought about the first gala I had organized here, how nervous I had been, how much I had wanted it to be worthy of the cause. Tonight it would be worthy of something else entirely. I had arrived 45 minutes early. That was deliberate. I wanted to be present in the room before Damon arrived, wanted to greet people on my own terms, wanted the 200 guests who filled that ballroom to see me as I had always been, not as a wife standing beside her husband, but as the woman who had built the event they were attending. Tonight that distinction mattered. I wore a gown the color of deep burgundy, fitted with a neckline that was elegant without asking for attention, my mother's pearl earrings, my hair up. I had gotten dressed alone in the guest bathroom of our house because I had not wanted Damon to see me before I was ready. When I came downstairs, he was in the foyer adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror navy suit pocket square, the image he had spent 20 years perfecting. He turned when he heard my heels on the floor, and his expression did the thing it used to do in the early years, a genuine appreciation that I had once loved receiving. "You look incredible," he said. "Thank you," I said. We drove to the Biltmore in near silence. He took a call from someone at the firm for most of the ride. I looked out the window at Atlanta in the dark, the lights on Peachtree, the skyline I had loved my entire life, and I breathed slowly and thought about nothing at all. Renee was already in the lobby when I arrived. She was wearing a deep gold dress that made her look like she had been specifically designed to stand in that room. And when she saw me, she crossed the marble floor and took both my hands and looked at me the way only someone who has known you for 19 years can look at you. "How are you?" she said quietly. "Ready," I said. She squeezed my hands once. "Then let's go." Marcus was stationed near the entrance to the grand ballroom in a dark suit, looking for all the world like a guest rather than an attorney with a sealed evidence package in the interior pocket of his jacket. He caught my eye as I passed and gave me the smallest nod. Everything was in position. Gerald Ashford was already seated at his table near the front table, 4 where he sat every year by preference. He was with his wife Eleanor and 2 colleagues from his investment partnership. He stood when he saw me and embraced me warmly, told me the room looked beautiful, asked about my work. I asked about his. We talked for 4 minutes about a commercial development project his firm was considering. He mentioned Tiffany said she had seemed distracted lately, a little distant, but he supposed that was the nature of a demanding position. I held his gaze and said, "You should be proud of her. She's exactly where she wanted to be." I moved on before he could read anything in my face. The evening proceeded the way these evenings do, cocktails and greetings and the layered noise of 200 people who know each other well enough to perform ease in each other's presence. I moved through it with the fluency of 8 years of practice, shaking hands, thanking donors, speaking with board members. People told me the gala had never looked more beautiful. I thanked them and meant it and kept moving. Damon arrived 20 minutes after I did. I watched from across the room as he entered, the way the energy shifted slightly when he walked in, the way people turned, the way his presence announced itself. He was good at this. I had always known that. He worked the room with the ease of someone who had learned to treat every social situation as an opportunity, moving from table to table with his hand extended and his laugh ready, building the impression that he was exactly where he wanted to be, and everyone in the room was better for his presence. Tiffany arrived 30 minutes later. She wore a gown the color of red wine, her hair down, and she was escorted by no one. She went directly to the VIP table adjacent to the stage, the table Damon had assigned, I later learned, specifically for her. I watched her settle into her seat, watched her accept a glass of champagne from a passing server, watched her look across the room to where Damon was standing and exchange with him a glance that lasted 2 seconds too long. I picked up a glass of water and held it and kept watching. The formal program began at 8. The hospital's executive director gave remarks. A video played about the pediatric cardiac unit that the gala funded. There were testimonials from 2 families. I watched the room respond, the genuine emotion that moved across people's faces, the reminder of why we were all there, the thing underneath the ambition and the performance that was actually real. I had built this evening around that thing. I had always believed it deserved a room worthy of it. Then it was time for remarks from the gala's presenting sponsor, Hargrove Capital. Damon took the stage. He was extraordinary at this. I want to say that plainly because the truth of a person does not erase their gifts, and his gift was a room. He spoke about the hospital's mission with what sounded like genuine passion. He talked about legacy and community and the responsibility of those who had succeeded to invest in the city that had built them. People nodded. People leaned forward. He had them completely. And then he paused, smiled. The smile of a man at the absolute apex of his own story. Before I close, he said, I want to take a moment to introduce someone who has been instrumental to Hargrove Capital's next chapter, someone whose vision and energy have been transformative for everything we are building. He looked down from the stage, not at me, not in my direction, not even in the direction of the table where I was seated. He looked directly at Tiffany Ashford, my partner, in every sense of the word. Applause began, the automatic, polite applause of a room that is not entirely sure what it just heard, but is responding to the speaker's confidence. A few people looked around. A few people looked at me. I was already standing. I reached across the table and picked up the small wireless microphone that had been placed there, the one I used every year to close the program, the one the audio technician had confirmed was live when I asked him quietly during cocktail hour. I held it at my side for 1 moment. The applause was fading. Damon was stepping back from the podium, satisfied, luminous, with his own certainty. I raised the microphone, and I smiled the smile I use in a courtroom when I am about to introduce evidence that changes everything. Thank you, Damon, I said. My voice came through the speakers, clear and warm and completely steady. 200 faces turned toward me. And thank you all for being here tonight for a cause that has meant so much to me personally for 8 years. I paused, just long enough. I'd also like to make an announcement. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Biltmore went very still, not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for a speaker to continue. Something different. The particular stillness of 200 people who have collectively sensed that the atmosphere in a room has changed in a way that cannot be taken back. The jazz quartet had stopped between sets. The servers had paused near the walls. Even the candlelight seemed to hold itself. I stood at my table in my burgundy gown with my mother's pearl earrings and the wireless microphone in my hand, and I looked out at the room I had built for 8 years, the donors, the board members, the investors, the colleagues, the people who had known my name before they knew Damon's, though some of them had forgotten that, and I spoke the way I had been trained to speak when the stakes were highest, clearly, without performance, without anger. For those of you who may not know me well, I said, my name is Celeste Hargrove. I am the founding attorney of the legal structure of Hargrove Capital Group. I have been the organizing force behind this gala for 8 consecutive years, and I have been Damon Hargrove's wife for 12. A pause. Natural, unhurried. Tonight I am filing for dissolution of marriage on the grounds of adultery and financial fraud, specifically the unauthorized attempted transfer of marital equity assets to a third party through a series of shell companies incorporated in Delaware. The stillness in the room deepened into something I can only describe as collective held breath. I want to be clear that this announcement is not made in anger. It is made in the interest of transparency, particularly for the investors in this room whose financial interests are directly tied to the legal structure of Hargrove Capital. I turned slightly. Mr. Ashford. Gerald looked up from table 4. His face was already changed. The warmth of the evening had drained from it, replaced by something careful and alert. My attorney Marcus Webb has a document package for you at the door. I believe you'll want to review it before your next board meeting. Marcus stepped forward from his position near the entrance and crossed the room to Gerald's table. He set the sealed envelope on the white tablecloth with the quiet precision of a man who had done this exact thing in his imagination, many times. Gerald looked at the envelope, looked at Marcus, looked at me. Then he looked at his daughter. Tiffany was sitting at the VIP table with her champagne glass still in her hand. The color had left her face in the way color leaves a room when someone turns off the wrong light, suddenly completely leaving everything looking different than it did a moment before. She set the glass down. It made a small sound against the table that was audible in the silence. Gerald opened the envelope. He did not read every page. He didn't need to. The photograph on the third page, Damon and Tiffany, on a private terrace in Savannah, the weekend of the investor summit that never was told him what he needed to know in the time it takes to understand an image. I watched his face as he looked at it. I watched the pride of a father who believed his daughter was thriving collapse into something slower and more permanent. He looked up at Tiffany. She did not look back at him. She was looking at Damon. And Damon. I want to tell you about Damon in that moment, because this is the moment I had imagined from every angle for 9 months, and the reality of it was both exactly what I expected and nothing like I had prepared for. He was still standing near the podium when I began speaking. I watched him from across the room as the words landed: adultery, financial fraud, shell companies, marital equity. And I watched the particular architecture of his confidence dismantle itself in real time. It did not happen all at once. That was what was striking about it. It happened in sequence, like a building losing its load-bearing walls one by one. First, the smile. It didn't disappear, it just stopped being connected to anything. It stayed on his face for several seconds after his eyes had gone somewhere else entirely, like a screen still displaying an image after the power has been cut. Then his hands. He had been holding the edge of the podium lightly, the posture of a man who has just finished speaking to a room he owns. I watched his knuckles go white, not gradually, suddenly the grip tightening the way hands tighten when the body is trying to hold on to something that is no longer there. Then his color. The warm brown of his face went ashen in the way I had only ever seen happen to people in courtrooms, in the moment a verdict is read that they did not anticipate, starting at the edges, moving inward. Then his voice, he tried to speak. I know he did because I saw his jaw move, saw him draw breath, saw him turn toward me with the beginnings of a sentence forming, and nothing came out. The voice that had filled that room 20 minutes earlier, the voice that had made 200 people lean forward, broke somewhere between his chest and his mouth and arrived at his lips as nothing. He turned to look at Tiffany. She was already standing. She had her clutch in her hand, and she was moving not toward Damon, not toward the stage, but toward her father. Gerald had risen from his chair. He was not a man who made scenes. What he did was quieter and more devastating than a scene. He simply looked at his daughter as she approached him, and he said in a voice that carried only as far as their table and no further, "Not here." Then he took his wife's arm and walked toward the exit without looking back. Tiffany stopped, stood in the middle of the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Biltmore in her red wine gown with her clutch in her hand and nowhere to go. She did not look at Damon again. The room had begun to move, the low sound of voices, the shift of chairs, the specific social energy of 200 people simultaneously recalibrating. 3 of Hargrove Capital's investors rose from their tables within 90 seconds of each other and moved toward Marcus near the entrance. I had anticipated 2. There were 4. Damon came off the stage. He crossed the room toward me, and his gait was wrong. The easy authority of his usual walk was gone, replaced by something effortful and unsteady, like a man navigating terrain that had shifted beneath him. He reached me at my table, and he stood there, and I looked at him, and I waited. Celeste. His voice, when it finally came, was not the voice he used in boardrooms or at podiums or across dinner tables when he wanted to end a conversation. It was smaller than that, stripped of its finish. "Please, if we can just talk, if you would just let me explain." Explain what, Damon? All of it. I know how it looks. I know what you think, but there are things you don't understand about the pressure I've been under, about what this company needed, about... I understand everything, I said. I read every document. I understand the shell companies. I understand the Delaware filings. I understand Section 31. I paused. I wrote the clause you were trying to erase. Did you know that I wrote it? You signed it, and you never read it. His jaw worked. His eyes were doing something I had not seen them do before, something unguarded and afraid and very young. "I'm sorry," he said. "Celeste, I am genuinely sorry. I lost my way and I made choices that I know there's no excuse, but 12 years has to count for something. Please." I looked at him for a long moment, at the face I had looked at across Sunday morning coffee tables and courtroom preparation sessions and 12 years of ordinary evenings, at the man I had loved completely and built a life around and chosen every single day until the day I chose differently. "You're not sorry, Damon," I said. "You're sorry you got caught." I picked up my water glass, took a sip, set it down carefully. "Remember when you said I just handled the paperwork?" I said. "It turns out the paperwork is everything, and you signed all of it." I picked up my evening bag from the table. I straightened my shoulders. And I walked out of the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Biltmore Hotel, past the investors talking quietly with Marcus, past the hospital staff standing wide-eyed near the stage, past the candles still burning on every table for a room that had entirely changed without looking back once. Renee was waiting for me in the lobby. She took one look at my face and handed me her car keys. "You drive," she said. "I'll get us food." I laughed. For the first time in 9 months, I laughed real and sudden and entirely mine. Outside, Atlanta was cool and lit and indifferent and beautiful. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the Biltmore for one moment, breathing it in the October air, the city noise, the specific feeling of a thing that has been held for a very long time, finally being set down. 6 weeks later, Hargrove Capital lost 40% of its investment base when Gerald Ashford withdrew his partnership and made 3 calls to colleagues who trusted his judgment without question. The venture capital division Damon had built his next chapter around collapsed before it processed its first fund. The board placed him on administrative leave pending an internal fraud investigation. The law firm he had hired to dismantle my equity protection clause quietly dissolved its engagement when the nature of their work became a matter of legal record. Tiffany left Atlanta. I heard she went to Memphis. I did not look further than that. And Damon moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown, a building I drove past once not looking for it, just happening to pass it on the way to somewhere else. I thought about him up there in those rooms, without the Buckhead house, without the corner office, without the title, without the room full of people whose attention had always been his oxygen. I thought about him picking up his phone to call the friends who used to fill his calendar and finding that the version of him they had known, CEO Damon Hargrove, Atlanta power player, man of vision, no longer existed as a category they needed to fill. I did not feel triumphant about that. I want to be honest. What I felt was quieter than triumph. More like the feeling after a very long storm when the air finally clears and you can see exactly how far the damage extends, and you understand for the first time the full shape of what you survived. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in February in Judge Patricia Okafor's courtroom on Pryor Street. Damon's new attorney made one last argument that the spousal equity protection clause was unenforceable. Judge Okafor read the clause, looked up, said in the flat and final voice of someone who has heard every argument and is not interested in hearing them again, "Sir, your client's signature is on page 47, witnessed, notarized, and executed in full accordance with Georgia contract law. Is there anything else?" There was nothing else. I walked out of that courtroom into a February morning that was cold and bright and smelled like the beginning of something. I want to tell you about the first morning. Not the morning after the gala that night. I had driven around Atlanta with Renee for 2 hours eating jerk chicken from a place on Cascade Road that stayed open late talking and not talking in the easy way of people who have known each other long enough that silence is just another form of conversation. Not the morning after the divorce was finalized that day. I had spent mostly in motion, signing documents and returning calls and doing the practical work of a life being restructured. I want to tell you about the morning 3 weeks after the finalization when I woke up in my new house in Grant Park and lay still for a moment before I remembered where I was. The house was smaller than the one in Buckhead, 1,400 square feet on a quiet street with oak trees older than the neighborhood, a front porch with 2 chairs, a backyard with a garden that the previous owner had started, and I was slowly learning to continue. The bedroom had one window that faced east, and in the early morning the light came through it at an angle that fell across the hardwood floor in a long, warm rectangle that moved as the sun moved. I had not had a bedroom window that faced east since my apartment in law school. I lay there and I watched the light move, and I breathed. There was no performance in that breath, no maintenance of composure, no calculation of what expression to arrange on my face before going downstairs, no management of the specific silence of a house where someone is pretending everything is fine. There was just air coming in and air going out, and the sound of the neighborhood waking up outside, and a cardinal in the oak tree by the back fence, doing what cardinals do at 6 in the morning, regardless of what human beings have been through. I thought, this is what peace feels like. I had forgotten. I got up, made coffee in a kitchen that was entirely mine. My dishes, my cups, the small cast-iron skillet my mother had given me when I moved into my first apartment that had somehow survived every transition. I took my coffee out to the front porch and sat in one of the 2 chairs and watched Grant Park come to life around me. A woman walking a dog, 2 kids on bikes, an old man across the street tending something in his yard with the unhurried attention of someone who has nowhere else to be. I sat there for 45 minutes. I was not thinking about anything in particular. I was just present in a way I had not been present in a very long time. Present in my own life, in my own body, in my own morning. That was when I understood what had actually been taken from me in those 12 years. Not the house, not the equity, not the professional recognition or the social position or any of the material things that the divorce proceedings had spent months quantifying and distributing. What had been taken from me gradually, so gradually I had not noticed it going, was the simple experience of being at home in my own existence, the ease of moving through a day without monitoring, the freedom of a thought that didn't have to be managed before it was spoken. I had not known how much of myself I was spending on maintenance until I stopped having to maintain anything. Renee came over that Saturday with groceries and spent the afternoon in my kitchen making her mother's gumbo, the recipe she had been perfecting for 20 years. And we sat at my kitchen table and ate and talked the way we used to talk in college, about everything, about nothing, about the future, about the past, about the specific comedy and tragedy of being the women we had become. She told me about a client she was infuriated with. I told her about a new case I had taken on a pro bono matter involving a woman trying to protect her small business from a predatory investment agreement. We laughed until my sides hurt about something that wasn't even that funny, but became funnier the longer we let it go. At some point in the evening, she looked at me across the table and said, "You look like yourself again." I thought about that for a long time after she left. The professional rebuilding was its own kind of work. Whitfield and Associates had been in certain ways a space that Damon had colonized. There were colleagues who had networked with me primarily as access to him events we had attended as a unit, a professional identity that had become partially entangled with his. Disentangling it was not always comfortable. Some relationships fell away. I let them. What remained was cleaner and more honest. My actual work. My actual reputation built on 15 years of decisions made in rooms where Damon's name was irrelevant. The landmark case I had won 2 years earlier, the precedent that my colleagues said would be cited for decades. The clients who called me because of what I could do, not because of whose wife I was. By spring, I had been approached by a new venture, a women-led investment fund called Elevate Capital, founded by 3 women I had known professionally for years, looking for a general counsel who understood both the legal architecture of investment firms and the particular vulnerabilities that women-owned businesses faced in securing and protecting capital. They wanted someone who had seen the inside of a major firm and understood how the machinery worked. I understood how the machinery worked. I joined Elevate Capital in April. My first act was to design their foundational legal structure. Every protection clause, every equity safeguard, every mechanism that would ensure the women who built that firm could not have it built out from under them by someone they trusted. I spent 3 weeks on those documents. I read every page 4 times. I was very thorough about page 47. My mother came to visit in May. She stayed for 10 days, slept in the guest room, tended my inherited garden with a competence I had not anticipated, and an enthusiasm that made me understand where my own stubbornness came from. On her last evening, we sat on the front porch with sweet tea and watched the neighborhood go golden in the late light, and she reached over and put her hand on mine the way she had done my entire life when she wanted to say something she meant completely. "Your grandmother used to say," she told me, "that a woman who knows her own foundation doesn't need anyone else to tell her what she's built on." I thought about page 47, about a clause I had written at 29 years old in a kitchen in a different life at 2 a.m, with takeout containers on the table, and a man I loved telling me we were going to build something incredible together. I had written it as a protection, a just in case, a small act of self-preservation so instinctive I had almost forgotten I'd done it. I had built my own foundation before I even knew I was going to need one. I squeezed my mother's hand. "I know," I said. "There are things I still carry from those 12 years. I want to be honest about that too, because these stories sometimes end too cleanly, the pain resolved too completely, and that is not how human beings actually work. I still have mornings when something small, a song, a smell, a particular quality of Sunday light reaches back and finds something tender. I still sometimes drive past the house in Buckhead and feel the ghost of what I thought I was building there. Grief does not follow a schedule, and it does not ask permission, and it does not care that you won. But I also have the front porch in the morning, the cardinal in the oak tree, the kitchen that is entirely mine, the work that is entirely mine, the face I see in the mirror of a woman who walked into the most important room of her life and did not flinch. I have Renee, who has known me since I was 18 years old and has never once told me to make myself smaller to fit someone else's space. I have my mother's voice saying, "Your foundation," And I have the knowledge, the deep, settled, unassailable knowledge that I built the thing that protected me before I knew I needed protecting. That when the moment came, the preparation was already done. That the woman I was at 29 working late at a kitchen table on a document no one else was going to read carefully enough was already taking care of the woman I would be at 41, standing in a ballroom with a microphone in her hand. She took care of me. I try to take care of her. My name is Celeste Monique Hargrove. I am 41 years old. I am a founding partner, a corporate attorney, and the woman who built the foundation. And I am the woman who decided what to do with it. I am not what was done to me. I am not the marriage that tried to erase me. I am not the signature on a document someone hoped I would never read carefully enough. I am every late night at a kitchen table, every clause written with precision and care, every decision made in a room where no one was watching and the only witness was my own integrity. That is what I am. And no one signs away what you built in the dark without your eyes open. To anyone listening to this who is sitting in a house that has stopped feeling like home, who is performing fine for an audience of one who is watching someone use your foundation to build a life that doesn't include you, I want you to hear this. You already have everything you need. It is possible you wrote it down somewhere and forgot about it. Go find it. Read every page. Pay attention to page 47. Your preparation is not wasted just because the moment hasn't come yet. It's coming. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, drop a comment and tell me about a time you found strength you didn't know you still had. Your words matter to this community more than you know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because every story on this channel is built for the woman who needs to hear that she is not alone and that the ending is not written yet. We build it ourselves.